Some of you have made a leap and decided that you want to start painting. So what we've done is put together 5 tips that will take some of the pain out of that for you. Tip number 1. So your workspace. Think about making a mess, basically. You need to be free to be able to paint and not have to worry about making a mess. You need a little bit of room. I understand not everyone has the luxury of that, but make as much space as you possibly can and eliminate the fear of making a mess. So another thing to consider about your workspace is the light. I like natural light, but you need to know a couple of things about that. The first thing is that it will change through the day. So it's a good idea. So at the moment our sun rises there and goes almost straight over the top and goes that way, which is perfect. I get really nice even light through most of the day. Gets a little bit yellower towards the afternoon. But think about the light and think about as much even natural light as you possibly can. So if you don't have access to natural sunlight, probably you could probably just get away with a really nice, like a fluoro with a warm daylight. You can buy bulbs that say white light or daylight, and that'll probably get you out of trouble. So 2. 2 is for tools. What we're looking at now is paintbrushes. I think that you shouldn't spend too much money on paintbrushes. I use these cheap ones. These are slightly better quality than these ones, but they're very inexpensive. They're firm enough to push thick, heavy acrylics around and soft enough to do kind of some nuanced marks and things like that. I recommend getting, say, a 12, a 10, an 8, a 6 and a 2, something like that. So you've got a range of brushes and flats in the short term, and develop a real relationship with those brushes. Really play with them and work out what they'll do, and you'll find that every brush after that becomes a lot easier to use. So when people are starting out, there's sometimes a misconception that a different brush will fix your problems. It's not true, it's you. So I say keep it simple, learn the basics with very cheap, simple brushes, keep everything simple, and you'll develop a really strong knowledge about what brushes you need as you develop, as your skill develops. So palette. Now you'll get a lot of different opinions about this. I personally think start with a really big palette, or as big as you possibly can fit in the space that you've got, and use your palette as a space to mix color, work out whether the color's right or not, and give yourself plenty of room. You'll find if you have a tiny little palette, you'll start to sort of freeze up and start to get all tight. Whereas if you have a bigger palette and a bigger pot for mixing up all your paint on and tidying up, you'll find that you'll be much more expressive and much less restricted. Okay. So the next thing is your water pot. I say get a nice big water pot. If you've got plenty of water in there and you clean out your brushes fairly regularly, it'll take a lot longer to contaminate this amount of water than it would if you had a smaller pot, and you're less likely to drag colours you don't want into your picture, and you don't have to go and clean out your water all the time. So I'm going to include painting surfaces in the tools, and you've got a few things you can paint on. I personally like painting on stretched canvas. And you can paint on these canvas boards here, relatively inexpensive. You can also paint on watercolor paper, but that requires a little bit of preparation, but fun just the same. If you are using the cheap canvases or the canvas boards or the watercolor paper, for example, they're very, very porous and they'll suck all the moisture out of your paint. So it's not a bad idea to give them a coat of paint just to seal them up first. Don't do it like this. Just mix up your brush strokes and seal the surface, and you'll find that the paint will move around a lot easier. So the next tool to consider is your easel. Now I've got this one here. This is my portable one I drag around. You can buy lightweight versions of that. They're fantastic. They're kind of like a Rubik's Cube though, so you might need to practice a little while before you get the hang of them. This is my one that I use for my big paintings here, and it's great. I can, do big paintings and move them around, and it supports all of that. And I've got a couple of others because I'm some sort of weird easel hoarder. But some of you might not have space, so you know, a tabletop easel might be all you can afford. There's some really good ones, or not afford, but afford space-wise. And there's some really good ones on the market. They're fantastic, they're quite robust, and you can actually convert them if you need to paint with a sort of in more space. You can actually convert them into a stand-up easel as well. So lots of good things on the market. The important thing to remember though is that it's reasonably solid. I'm pretty vigorous when I paint, so things get moved around, so something that's nice and solid is a great idea. 4, is that the right way? 4 is paints. So what I want you to do is take the money that you would have spent on your paintbrushes and spend it on your paints. A lot of people have some really strong ideas about paint, but I personally think you're better off to spend a little bit more money on your paint and develop your skills around a paint that behaves like a good quality paint. So, you know, even if you're using a student's acrylic, use a good quality one. The rubbish ones are just frustrating. So the quality paints I recommend are, you know, the Chroma paints, the Chroma acryls, okay to get you started, but the A2 series, something like that's great. But there's of course a lot of paint companies around that make really good quality paints. They're just my choice. But as I said, go with better quality paint straight away and you'll suffer much less. So tip number 5 is actually about painting. So paint with confidence. A couple of little things around that. Enjoy yourself. Remember to enjoy yourself. But don't pick images that are going to beat you up, basically. Stick with something nice and simple, subtle gradations and, you know, silhouettes, things like that, reflections in the water, and not too much detail in the short term, and build up your confidence that way. The last thing you want to do is go and buy all of that stuff, paint for a little while and then leave it in the cupboard. We want you to be smashing out masterpieces in no time at all. So I hope you've enjoyed these tips and that they're useful in some ways. You would have noticed somewhere about there some links, and they'll take you to our Explore Acrylic Painting website, which has got so much stuff in it. There's all of the stuff that we've mentioned, plus you'll get lost in there for hours, but I think it's great and useful stuff. And enjoy painting, what can I say?